For this session, I would like to invite Murli Nambiar, who is a CISO from SBI. In this session, we hope to get insights about data security and the kind of cyber defense mechanisms that will be increasingly needed to safeguard the information and digital assets from the cyber threats. To moderate this session, I would like to invite Kumar Sharma, who is a Deputy Editor, Financial Express Digital. Can we have a huge round of applause, please?
Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Nambiar. It's really very important for us. And while I'm the immoderate moderator here, but I hope to minimize my intervention and get to hear more from you. Very briefly, you are in an important area, as we discussed earlier also. Wherever we talk about any element in the banking arena, this element of information and security kind of is just has to be there and increasingly needs to be there. Earlier in the day, when there was this mention of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and all of that, and that we have been able to withstand financial shocks, and they have shown that also, and we've done very well also. But in this connected world, and that has often been said that we are in a connected world, still the element of risk is always there, the fear in terms of what will happen, and information security becomes the first target usually. So if I can begin with in the current landscape on information security, I was trying to write down a few points. What do you think has changed in the last few years? If you can just give a backdrop to where we are today, and what you see as the perhaps new threats that organizations need to be aware of increasingly. You can begin from there.
Thank you so much. Good morning all, pleasure being here. This is a very pertinent question, and usually the first thing that gets asked kind of thing. So I have been in the industry for close to about 30 plus years, and I have seen the landscape change from the initial days when we had just the antivirus to worry about, to where we stand today, right? And after all these years also, we are still not in a state where we could actually have a good night's sleep and think that everything is fine, right? So it's always been a catch-up game that has usually happened between the information security and the hackers. From a landscape perspective, like I said earlier, initially we used to worry about having an antivirus solution. You should have a firewall in place to protect the environment and all those kind of things. But now the landscape has changed drastically, right? Earlier the attention of these hackers was very minimal. It was not really very specific to many organizations. But now we are in a state where every organization is under their radar, right? And it is not only the normal hackers that we look at and speak about. We are also talking about nation-state actors, okay? People who are motivated, who are actually trained by nation-states, and they have their full backing in terms of trying to infiltrate into organizations and carry out either corporate espionage or to bring the systems down. So the maturity has increased drastically over the past few years. The attack vectors also have changed, right? Initially, it was a few attacks which were trying to do some frauds, but now it has become even more sophisticated. So we have a big problem, for example, about the phishing attacks that normally happen, right? Social engineering. Now, this is one of the biggest challenges that I think a CISO faces on the ground today. The customer base is so huge and it is so disparate, right? You have people of various categories who actually do banking. And every one of them has got their own understanding about what things are and what needs to be done. So the hacker has got this advantage of, trying to break into the psyche of these elements, these categories of people that we have got. So he will basically look at, for example, somebody who's an army person, for example. So he will target his attack very specifically to the army person, what he will actually want to see or do, for example, and then make that attack specific to that guy, right? So this is like a very sophisticated way of doing things, and it has changed from what we used to experience earlier, which was very normal one-to-one kind of thing. But now we have a gang of people who operate. I think many of you must be aware about Jantara as well. right? Initially, it was only Jamtara that we had to worry about. Now there are another 10 states where this particular problem is, not states, but locations where this problem has now started off, right? So these people are always, thinking on how to defraud. They are always trying to think how to be one step ahead, of the security team. So the challenge for us has always been an ongoing thing. But from a threat perspective, if you ask me, the social engineering and phishing attacks are one of the major problems that we face today. How do you sort of ensure that our customers are made aware about the challenges that come through this channel, what they should do to keep themselves aware? The other one that I would think of is the third party, the supply chain attacks. Many organizations today actually don't work in silos. You have partners, you have other entities who integrate with you, and you do transactions. So it's a connected world, right? So for the hackers, the easiest thing is that they don't have to try and attack the primary organization at all. They have to just find one partner, one vendor who has got a loose security control, and then enter into the organization through that, right? So I'm sure many of you must have heard about the SolarWinds attack that happened, right? It was a brilliant attack. I mean, nobody knew about this for so many months, and then they actually managed to get into the organizations, which the SolarWinds teams used to actually support. So this is how they function. I mean, if you look at the Bangladesh Swift attack, for example, brilliantly executed, right? I mean, the way they have done it is like, they knew what to do. They exactly knew the process. They knew what time frames when the bank would not be aware, they will not be, sort of on the ground, and they executed exactly at those periods. So, the ransomware attack, which actually is another major problem, that the phishing is basically the first step. So once you do the phishing attack and you manage to get into the organization, the ransomware payload is then put on that environment. And initially, again, it was primarily doing only ransomware. Now they actually exfiltrate the data as well. So they take the data out and they actually have you at two folds. One is ransomware in terms of making your systems unusable, and second, selling the data on the dark web. So it's become more and more sophisticated in the days that have come so far. So the landscape has changed drastically, and our work is sort of just keeps increasing every time. So that's how it is.
I can understand actually, because we also track healthcare sector, and there was this big worry when ICMR's data, there was this question of such a huge amount of data of 80 crore, all of that, and being sold on the dark net and things like that. Phishing attack, actually, when you mentioned, in fact, I was talking to one of a very leading corporate who didn't want to be named actually. He mentioned that he's a big philanthropist, a very well-known name from the IT sector. He was mentioning that he got a message saying that some 30,000 rupees or something needs to be given. So he thought it's a small amount, and he immediately paid. The person who was doing this got greedy and asked for it again, which is when he called up the person who's originally and said that, why do you suddenly need like this in tranches? And he said, I never asked for it. So I think, then when we looked at it, we understand that actually crores are actually being lost. It's a huge thing. Okay. So if you mentioned about some of the newer threats and the form which they've taken.
So I'll just add on to that, right? So the other part of that is basically deepfakes. I'm sure you heard about that. It was in the news very recently, right? Deepfakes is another threat factor that has really taken off. People have become so adept at that. You have a call, like you mentioned, from somebody who sort of says that I'm so and so and I need this kind of money. Earlier, it was only limited to an audio call, but now they actually have video as well. So, the entire vector keeps changing every time. So the minute you start plugging the audio thread, they take the video one. Now we have sort of understood how the video function works. I'm sure they'll come up with something new to take to the next level, actually. So that's how the things work here.
My goodness, yeah. So, I think just trying to, like how you have know your customer, I think it's about time we have know your fraudster. Okay. So perhaps we'll get there as well. With the kind of bright minds we have here, I'm sure we'll have a solution there. In the realms of this data security, the kind of cyber defense mechanisms, I mean, that's something which is crucially linked to the problem that we have on hand. If you can just throw some light in terms of kind of safeguard information, the kind of just the assets, how where we are today, and what are 2 or 3 challenges at least that you think bother you at night? I hope you have a good sleep at night, but something if it does bother, what would that be?
See, from a cyber defense perspective, I think one of the most important aspects that any organization should know is the landscape that they are trying to protect. Okay. Now, I don't know, just a general thing that many organizations today may not have a very effective, for example, asset management system itself. Right? Very basics. This is like the cyber hygiene. If you don't have this in place, then technically anything else you do doesn't have any relevance, right? So I have always been a proponent of this fact that, while you may have very fancy security solutions into place, you may have, the greatest firewall, you may have the IPS in systems and all this is all fine, right? But unless you know what you're trying to protect, none of this really matters, right? So it's very important from a cyber defense perspective to have visibility on your assets, right? You got to know exactly how many systems are there in your environment today, how many are, for example, put in stock, how many are as standby. That entire mapping of the assets is extremely important on the ground.
Is it not there?
No, I'm saying it is there, but I'm saying that every organization should look at those areas first. Like I said, the defense aspects are, we have this defense by depth kind of an approach. So what we do is you usually have, 4 or 5 layers of security before the attacker can actually go to that main system that he's trying to target, right? But like I said, this is something that every organization will have. But what organizations should actually look at is today that whether they have a proper asset management environment, and again, I'm talking from a generic perspective, and whether these systems, for example, let's suppose you take an asset inventory and you find, say, example, you have got 100 systems in the environment, right? Now, are these 100 systems actually being visible in your security solutions? Right? So you have Active Directory, which is normally used for authentication mechanisms, right? So are these 100 systems actually being seen in your Active Directory? Are they being seen in your antivirus, in your EDR solution, in your DLP solution? This is one of the biggest defenses that any organization can have. I can talk about very fancy stuff and all, but technically, if your hygiene is not in place, you will always have trouble in trying to ensure the protection of your environment. So this is like one of the main areas kind of thing. The other part is from a cyber defense perspective is that the consolidation of various security solutions is very important. Right? Today what we do is, you have different solutions for different problems. Right? You have solution A that will address your problem A, solution B that addresses problem B, and this creates a very disparate environment. Right? And it makes all the more difficult for your security analyst to understand where the link is. Right? How does it all tie up together? That is another cyber defense aspect that should be sort of kept in mind. That how do you ensure that you minimize your cyber defense environment? You keep it consolidated. You have a consolidated environment so that with one you can do money, and your analysts also don't have to bother about too many systems at that point in time. That's what I would sort of primarily say.
Very important. You mentioned briefly in your initial remarks, actually, you mentioned about ethical hacking. Now, how do you see the evolving approach to this actually? Because this is something, the use of this, the white hat hackers, as it were, they talk of various things. It's your realm really, and I'm taking the risk of taking some approaches from there, that the red team testing, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, all these things get thrown at us really. But how do you see, how is this approach to ethical hacking emerging, and how well can we embrace it?
I think this is a very important aspect of the entire security, defense mechanism itself. So while traditionally all companies will have a security engineering team that is responsible for the identification and protection of the environment, and you will have a security operations team that is more from a detection, respond, and recover perspective, right? So they will look at the attacks and they will figure out if something is going on, take action on it. The third team that I would highly advocate, like you mentioned about, is the ethical hacking team. Okay, This team is actually a super specialized set of people whose job is only to break into the environment. Their job is to see whether the security engineering team and the security operations team are actually doing their jobs correctly or not. So for example, I mean, you have a very critical application that is going live, right? So when the application goes live, you have the engineering team that gets involved to sort of make sure the application is secured, it works as expected, and you have the output correct. If any attack happens to that application, you have the SOC team who looks into the attack pattern and says what's happening kind of thing. But before the application actually goes live, the ethical hacking team is a much required team to try and break into it. Okay, because the kind of thinking that the ethical hacking team has is very different from these two teams that I spoke about, right? They have got a hacker's mindset. They will think like a hacker, and they will try to ensure, what are the channels available through which that application can be broken into, right? So when you look at penetration testing to be done, or vulnerability assessments to be done, or any ethical hacking to be done, this core team, and it's not like a team of 100 people or anything. You will have a very niche set of maybe about 15 people or 20 people who specialize in these areas.
You do it? Do you do it?
Yeah, we do it. We do it. We have a very specialized team of people who do this ethical hacking piece of it. And ideally, preferably, it's good to have your in-house team rather than get somebody from outside for obvious reasons. But if you don't have the that wherewithal to sort of have your own team, it's always okay to engage with a reputed partner who is sort of maybe certified by certain, for example, so you get an assurance, and get them to look at your applications at least once in a year, right? If not doing it regularly as a process, at least once in a year, get them to look at your applications from an outside-in perspective and see whether they are able to break into it. If you have really good guys, you will see wonders.
Just curiosity, maybe a small example also, so that for all who are here, one benefit out of, since you've worked with this thing, can you give us a small example, perhaps, because of this, it led to, let's say, this benefit? Is there?
Yeah, no, so for example, we have always observed that when an application, for example, is going live, right? The work is done by the two teams, the first two teams that I spoke about, the first team predominantly, right? But we have always noticed that when it comes to the third team, that is when you actually get an eye-opener. You actually see a lot of things that was sort of not covered in the first two rounds. Because see, we are all humans. At the end of the day, even the security guys are humans, right? So they will do things as per their process, their thoughts and everything. So having a counter check to that process, and somebody who is unbiased, who doesn't know the process that has been followed, but is doing it from a completely fresh outlook and trying to break into an application, we have seen wonders. We have seen wonders in that. And that approach is really doing great. I mean, I think it's one of the most critical factors I would advocate, for organizations to go through. But like I said, not everybody may want to have your own teams because they're very specialized people. Getting them from the market itself is very difficult.
You don't have such talent.
No, this talent is very, very niche. So you don't have too many people who actually fall in the bracket of a red teaming, ethical hacking team kind of thing. Very difficult to get these guys. And even if you get them, retaining them is even more difficult. So they'll stick on, for some time, then they'll have better prospects. Like I said, much in demand. So many organizations may actually take this decision to sort of outsource it to some third party, somebody who's reputed, has got good credentials, pedigree, and then engage with them on a yearly basis to do that activity. But I would highly recommend that practice to be sort of followed.
I'm trying to constantly, keep track of the time, and I have just a couple of questions more. But just to digress a bit, I also track microfinance sector, and I also tend to travel. It's not really about the systems or technology here. I'll give you one example. I was in Madhya Pradesh, in Bhopal. There was this microfinance borrower. This person actually, with the banking correspondent, he wanted to withdraw some money or something. So what he did is simple. He gave his Aadhaar card details, everything to the BC. He shared everything. वो निकाल के देगा मेरे को पैसे. उसको चाहिए था 500 रुपये वो कुछ 1000 रुपये इंटर करके उसको दे दिया. So we have said that we have formalized those who are not financially included, those digitally included are not digitally included. But this is not really your problem. But tell me, this was very telling. We are digitally connected now. But how do we solve? Is there a way to crack this problem? Because this was a question of faith. I mean, this person, it was very bad. So
I agree. See, there are always these bad elements, and they will use any opportunity where they can defraud people, right? And they always think that they will get away with it. So it's a human angle, something that cannot be predicted unless you have unless a person sort of complains saying that, he has removed 1,000 instead of 500, for example, right? That's the only way you will figure it out. So I don't think there's any hard and fast solution to this kind of a problem where you say, okay, this guy, for example, is a known bad guy and, I have taken him on board, which should not happen. So unless you do the background checks of these peoples and all, you will not really come to know. But even if you do a background check, you still don't know, how people turn, right? So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was just a digression. The other point is about the Security Operations Center. How to have an effective one? This is often thrown at us. So if you can just at least briefly tell us a bit about.
See, the security, like I said in my earlier, statement, the Security Operations Center is a team that sort of looks into the attacks that happen in your environment, and they are the ones who will normally respond to it. So if an attack is happening, they will respond and ensure that the attack is sort of controlled, mitigated kind of thing. To have an effective SOC, you will have to see it from a three perspective of, people, process, and technology. From a people angle, you need to have a very effective SOC team that comprises of primarily your L1 security analyst, right? They are the ones who will look into your attacks that are happening on a day-to-day basis, and they are the ones who will actually trigger an alert when they see something going wrong, right? Now, it's very important that this team of people are trained very well in terms of the analysis of events, right? They are like the safeguards for the environment, whether it's a bank or any other organization, right? And if one of those guys miss out finding an event, that could have disastrous consequences. So how do you have an effective L1 team, security analyst who can be trained in terms of finding out security issues, incidents when it happens, number one. Number two is obviously you will have an incident response team as well on top of it, right? So if a particular incident has been categorized, an event has been categorized as an incident, which means it is something that has made a material impact on the organization, you have an incident response team that comes into play, and they will be the ones who will ensure that the relevant action that is to be taken is taken by that team. So they will go to the ground, they will carry out forensics on the system, they will figure out how the attack has happened, whether that attack has been mitigated, whether it has been closed, plugged, those kind of things the response team will take care of, kind of thing. So having a good set of incident management and incident response team members is extremely important from a people perspective. From a process perspective, you should have a lot of SOPs in place, security, so standard operating procedures, which the L1 team will normally follow. So you will say that if you notice an event of, say, for example, some attack happening, you will go to this SOP and you will actually do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you need to have a very effective SOP, incident response playbook as well, a cyber crisis management playbook that the organization will use if there is an attack that happens. And lastly, the technology aspect of it, right? So what kind of security solutions do you have on the ground to protect your organization? So the general trend is that you should have an SIEM solution, which is your security information event management solution. You have your DAM for your database access management, and various other solutions, right? So whether you have an effective set of those technologies available for you to detect incidents when it happens and to respond to it, whether you have a threat intelligence platform, for example, very important, right? So how do you get various threats that come into the environment, and how are these threats then taken into your SIEM for consumption, and the analyst will work on it. So these three areas, you will have different aspects to look at. And then you should sort of, then I think you'll have an effective, SOC in place kind of thing.
I can understand the challenge that it must be for someone like you and in your field. Terrible, really. But in fact, in one of the conversations earlier, one of the bankers once told me that don't look at fraud and say, okay, in this area fraud happens, in that area fraud happens. Fraud is now also a platform in some sense. So is that really that bad?
It's a platform as in sense that it is actually executed in a very structured and a very coordinated manner kind of thing. The modus operandi that is used by these various people like Jantara, people that I'm talking about, very they know what is exactly to be talked about, what statements to make to the other guy, how to sort of move around his concerns, his doubts, how do you convince him. That is very structured and the way they do it is very, very, sort of methodical kind of thing.
Two more points before I let you go. And before you leave, actually, just want, for our the audience here, 2 or 3 takeaways that you would want them to actually in this arena to keep as the key priorities. I would want you to just share those. But before that, there is this element which has also been thrown at me about this risk, the secure by risk design, secure by design applications, risk from applications and how to have a secure by design approach in applications. This is also often talked about. If you can just throw some light on this.
This is a very, very key aspect, what has been brought up. The secure by design philosophy basically says that the minute you conceptualize a banking application or any application that is there, the minute you conceptualize the application itself, security should be involved. Okay, traditionally what happens is we get involved at the UAT stage when you suddenly find that there are thousands of issues from the code perspective, or there are vulnerabilities that are identified, and then you spend a lot of time reworking on it. So your time is lost, your effort goes down the drain, your money is lost. So what we normally prefer to do is a secure by design operation, where the security team gets involved in the conceptualization stage itself. We discuss with the business guys in terms of what they want to achieve with that application. And when the bidder comes on board, before the bidder comes on board, we tell them the security requirements in the RFP itself. Right? It doesn't become an afterthought, because once the bidder comes on board or the vendor comes on board, telling him to do 100 things is not going to work, because he'll eventually put his hand up and say, I didn't know all these things were to be done. So you put these things in the RFP itself. Right? And once the bidder comes on board, you work with him in terms of telling him exactly how the development should happen in that life cycle. So we follow this, we follow this DevSecOps. No, that's okay. So we follow this DevSecOps option, development security operations. So we try to bring the security into the process. We bake it into the process so that you don't make it as an afterthought. And at the end, after you follow this process, you should actually have an application that is pretty rigid, right? Not from a flexibility perspective, but from a security perspective, right? So you will have minimal findings. Your VAPT will not throw you too much of issues. There will not be any code bugs, for example. So this secure by design is an extremely great channel. If you can get this thing also implemented on the organization, your after work, usually before going live, will be reduced drastically.
So that last point actually, which I mentioned about, 2 or 3 takeaways that you would want. I'm sorry, we are in the habit of making people talk. So that's, we are in fact paid for that.
I've never talked so much at a stretch.
And as a moderator is also, a bit of a problem, because some people tell me moderator is only literary midwifery that you have to do, and you're forced to do it. So, whereas the gyan comes from elsewhere, we are only conduit pipes. But anyway, the last point was on these takeaways, which I wanted 2 or 3 ones. But before that, I also want to ask you this, and this is my last question. Is in the context of now that there is this digital personal data protection bill. So in the light of this, some of the changes that would be needed. So keeping that in perspective as 2 or 3 priorities, which I can say as some takeaways that for the audience here. And I'll end with that.
So see, the DPDP Act basically has got two components. One is your business side of it, where you talk about the consent of the customers and you have to do a data minimization and all those kind of stuff. The other part is the security angle to it. So once you have the data of the customers with you, how do you sort of go about in terms of securing that data, right? And you have so many departments that make use of that data which is taken by the bank or by the organization, right? So one process that we have found very useful and something that has worked good for us is there is a process called as a data flow analysis. Right? We call it DFA, data flow analysis. What we do here is, with every critical department in your organization, you have a discussion with them in terms of understanding the business process flows that they follow. So you tell them that, if you are, for example, a trading department, how many business process do you normally have? For example, they'll come back and say, I've got 5, 10, 15, whatever, right? And you do a walkthrough of that business process from the start to the end of the process. Right? So you ask them the relevant questions to see how the process moves. And within that process flow, you concentrate on the data elements that are sort of created. So you may, for example, have a Word document that gets created. You may have an Excel document that gets created, a PDF, whatever format it may be, right? So you look at those data elements and you look at what data it contains. So you have an Excel file, for example, where you have customer information stored. Automatically the classification of that Excel file will become very high. It will become critical, right? Then you figure out in that process flow where that particular data is actually used. Where does it get stored? Where does it get processed? Where does it move within the environment and outside of the environment, right? So you figure out all the channels by which that data is used. So somebody can say, I upload this data to my vendor A for doing processing. Now, immediately the alarm bell should go off saying that, boss, it is a PII data, it's going to a vendor A, then what security do you have in that aspect, right? So when you do this process flow, you actually can figure out all of these channels where the data gets used, processed, transferred, stored, everything. And based on that, you define the security mechanisms on it, right? So once you say, okay, this Excel is important for me, and it has to go to a vendor A, the first thing that you should do is, if you have a DLP environment, which is a data leak prevention solution, you fingerprint this document in the DLP environment itself, right? So you ensure that if the data is going out, it is allowed from sender A to recipient B. That's it. Anytime the data is being sent out to anybody else, your DLP should block it, right? So that's the first step which you can take to figure out that the data is moving out of the organization. Second is, once the data reaches the vendor A also, what he can do with it also can be defined. So you have solutions like IRM, IRM, Information Rights Management, right? So that allows you to give granular rights on the data. You can actually specify saying that if I'm giving it to vendor A, he can only read the document, or he can read and print, or he can read, print and edit. You can give very granular rights to that document and which goes out, right? So while, like I said, the business side, people will take care. The security side, if you can do these processes of DFA, have a data loss prevention solution, and have a IRM solution, your security around the data, the actual Excel, Word, PowerPoint, whatever it may be, becomes extremely high. Your maturity level like shoots through the roof. So this is something that I would talk from the DPDP bill, something that we are doing. So
that's very nice. We always like letters of the English alphabet, the way we twist it or whatever, but it's always good. This AI and ML has changed our world, and now you got us some very insightful letters as well. Shagun, do we have time for a question or two, or can we? One question perhaps, if there is. Yeah. Can we take one question? Yeah, one question. Can you just say a bit about yourself and then a very brief question?
Thing everybody likes to talk about, because it's overall, if I'm losing my money, is this question. Yeah. So it's a stack. So the basic, I mean, you said a lot about how you can prevent and how you are trying to do it. But we all know that right now the data is scattered so much that we are having so many interfaces where we are exposing our data. So now looking at the data redundancy and considering all those aspects, because I might have my 5 copies of data, like Aadhaar card, PAN card, everything is scattered. Now, if you even say 4 organizations taking care of, but one of the organizations might have some issue, internal or external, whatever you say, in that case, there are, now onus comes to the users that you should take care of your own data. But that is not practically possible, because if I need to go for something, I need to pay or I need to give my details. So in these scenarios, it's more like ecosystem or frameworks which should be working. So any that kind of level of thing you can mention about, which
So
is
you're talking from the organization perspective, that how do you...
overall ecosystem rather, because now it's no more one organization holding my data.
Correct. No, so I got it. So actually what, as part of this DPDP bill, right?
Correct.
I think the first step that has to be taken is to figure out where your data is. Without that, you will not be in compliance. So you have to figure out where the data resides, right? Now, many of these technology solutions that I spoke about has got the facility to identify this data in your environment. Right, so if you look at an IRM or a DLP solution,
Correct.
they have this data discovery modules. So if you run that module, you can actually scan your server to figure out where this particular data element resides. So if you have, for example, a credit card number,
Correct.
you run a scan on a server and it will actually throw you all the files where that credit card number is found. Okay, so like I said, I mean, from a DPDP perspective, if you have to be in adherence, these 2 technologies that I spoke about will do wonders. I'm not selling the solutions, but from an actual, benefit perspective, I have always advocated these 2 solutions. And right from, I'm talking about the days when these were very, new solutions in the market right now. So it does amazing work. It does the data discovery. It will do the data classification as well.
That's important.
Yeah, it will do the data classification also for you. So the minute it finds a file which has got credit card number, it will classify it as critical, depending on your organization's policy. Right?
Correct.
And then you put it in the DLP for fingerprinting, so it doesn't go out. And you put IRM on it, information rights management, to say the recipient can do only so much with that document. But this will be your first step, finding out where the data is.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think we can engage informally with him. I've already made him talk a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very sorry for having to
No worries.
first step on this. Thanks a lot.